Elise Rowan diluted the last bottle of formula for her son with cold water, the one thing she had always sworn she would never do. Until the night, both her promise and her pride were defeated by the sound of a crying baby. Outside the rundown apartment on the southern edge of Charleston, rain slashed across the window like handfuls of gravel thrown into the dark, and inside the air felt thick and suffocating after the power had been cut since the afternoon, the refrigerator silent, the ceiling fan frozen, the whole place heavy like a room submerged underwater. Elise sat on the cold kitchen tiles with her back against the cabinet, a thin blanket wrapped tightly around her shoulders, her hands trembling so badly she had to grip her phone with both of them just to keep it steady. Edroom behind her, Milo cried. Not the kind of crying that came in bursts and faded, but a thin, exhausted, hunger-broken sound that tore a mother's heart into strands. Elise closed her eyes, but that only made things worse. She could still see the empty can of formula on the counter, the wallet with only a few coins left, the eviction notice taped crookedly across the door like a sentence already passed. She had once been someone who read numbers faster than others read emotions, someone who could flip through a stack of files and find flaws in minutes. At the marine insurance company she used to work for, she was the kind of woman no one remembered by name, but everyone double-checked their work when she said something was off. Then the company collapsed. The cuts came like a storm, a difficult pregnancy. Milo's father gone before the baby was even born, and after that came the bills, rent, medicine, childcare, each one like a low wave that never stopped, pushing her closer and closer to the edge. Milo cried louder, ed the last of the water into the bottle, shaking it for a long time as if motion alone could trick hunger. And when she lifted him, his tiny body burned with restless heat. He latched onto the bottle and sucked desperately, then stopped halfway, as if even a baby who could not speak understood he was being shortchanged by life. Elise turned her face away, her throat burning, then laid him back in the crib, returned to the kitchen, opened her phone, and scrolled to her brother's name, Ben, the one who had helped before, each time making her feel a little smaller. But tonight there was no room left for pride, only a hungry child and a mother with nothing left to sell except her own shame. She typed quickly, so quickly her eyes and, "I'm sorry to bother you again. I need $60 to buy formula for Milo. I get paid on Friday. I'll pay you back, please." And she hit send while her fingers were still shaking. Then she closed the phone, hugged her knees, pressed her forehead against her arms, and the kitchen fell into a cruel kind of quiet. Just the sound of rain, the drip from a leaking tap, Milo's faint sobs through the paper-thin wall. 5 minutes later, the phone vibrated, and Elise flinched so hard she almost dropped it, opening the message to see a single short line. "I think you have the wrong person." A chill ran through her whole body. She checked the number off, one wrong tap in the worst night of her life, and now her most desperate plea was sitting in a stranger's phone. Heat rushed to her face with shame as she typed back immediately. "I'm sorry. Wrong message. Please ignore." She sent it and was about to turn off the phone when it vibrated again. "Is your son okay?" Elise froze. It was not mocking, not a scam, not a joke, just a short, direct, strangely calm question, one that made her angry before it touched the softest part of her. Who was this stranger to ask as if he had the right to care? She did not reply at once, her eyes drifting toward the bedroom. Milo had quieted, but small whimpers still cut through her nerves, and finally she typed, "We'll manage." The phone lit up almost instantly. "I can help." Elise let out a dry laugh, then an ace of humor. "Thank you, but I don't take money from strangers." A brief pause, then the reply came. "Then now you know my name. I'm Nathaniel." Elise stared at the name, no last name, no explanation, just a name standing on the screen like a door slightly open in a dark hallway. She shook her head. Normal people did not do this. Kind people did not appear like this in the middle of the night. Every survival instinct told her to block the number. But then Milo cried again, and that sound tore through the last of her hesitation. She typed quickly, "I don't want to owe anyone anything." This time the reply came a moment slower. As ored carefully, "I'm not lending you money. I'm helping a baby get what he needs before morning." Elise swallowed, her heart pounding painfully. She hated the feeling of almost believing something too good to be true. hated the fragile hope rising in her chest like a weak flame that any small wind could put out. She sat there for a long time, opened her payment app, closed it, opened it again, and finally, as if signing her name to surrender, she sent her account details. 3 seconds passed, the phone vibrated. Elise looked down. At first, she did not understand what she was seeing. Then her gummed. The amount received was $7,500, not 60, not 100, but a number so large that for a moment it felt like she was looking at someone else's life. She jumped to her feet, her back hitting the counter, her breath caught in her throat. She opened the app, closed it, opened it again. The number was still there, cold, clear, terrifyingly real. Her fingers moved over the screen. "This is too much. I only need $60. The reply came immediately, then used the rest to breathe. Elise stared at that message, and for the first time in months, something inside her cracked. Not loudly, not dramatically, just a thin fracture spilled down her cheeks as she stood in the dark kitchen, clutching her phone to her chest, listening to the rain outside and realizing that somehow, in a way she could not explain, fate had just knocked on her door through a message sent by mistake. The next morning, Elise Rowan woke into a strange kind of silence, and it was that silence that frightened her. First, Milo was not crying. The kitchen was still dark because the power had not been restored. The rain from the night before had stopped, leaving only dampness clinging to the window and a cold draft seeping through the cracks. Elise sat up abruptly on the thin mattress laid directly on the floor, her heart pounding as her eyes darted to the crib beside her. Milo was sleeping, one hand resting against his cheek, his breathing steady and deep, as if for the first time in days, hunger had not dragged him out of sleep. And then Elise remembered. Lying by her pillow, the screen dark, but when she opened her banking app, the number was still there, cold, bright, undeniable, $7,500. It had not disappeared, had not been reversed, no fraud warning had appeared. The money sat in her account like something that did not belong to this life. Elise sat frozen for a few seconds, relief and fear running side by side inside her like opposing currents. She had met enough people to know kindness rarely came without a price, and had lived close enough to the edge to understand that when something looked like a miracle, it often carried a knife behind its back. Her phone lit up. Theniel. "How is Milo?" Elise stared at the question. She was not someone who trusted easily, especially not after everything life had done to her. But the way he kept mentioning her son, never asking how she had used the money, never demanding gratitude, never steering the conversation toward anything personal, unsettled her defenses. She replied briefly, "He is sleeping. Thank you." The screen went quiet for a few seconds before another message appeared. "Good. Let him sleep until he wakes on his own." That was all. Nothing more. But Elise felt her chest tighten. This man did not speak like someone granting favors. He spoke as if a child's survival was simply something that must come first. A tone both calm and dangerous because it made people want to believe. She had not even put her phone down at the door. Elise froze. No one came here in the morning except the landlord, debt collectors. Or worse, she stood up slowly, stepping across the cold floor, her eyes flicking to the rusted lock. The knock came again, louder, more decisive. Milo stirred in the crib. Elise held her breath and peered through the small peephole. Outside stood two men in delivery uniforms beside a white truck. Behind them were large cardboard boxes stacked so high they blocked nearly half the hallway. Elise opened the door slightly, her body still tense. "Miss Elise Rowan," she nodded, unable to speak. The delivery man handed her a digital pad to sign. Then they began carrying the boxes inside, one, then two, then three. Elise backed deeper into the cramped apartment, her eyes wide and dry. The heavy boxes were set down along the living room wall, the cardboard still carrying the scent of a warehouse. When the last man left, her apartment no longer looked the same. It felt like someone had just thrown survival into it, in quantities she did not know how to process. Elise knelt down and opened the first box. Formula. Many sat end on the shelf, but the one a doctor had once recommended when Milo had stomach issues. The second box held diapers, wipes, rash cream, an electronic thermometer, fever medicine for infants. The third contained packaged baby food, new bottles, soft blankets, several sets of baby clothes, folded as neatly as if they had just come from a store. In the last box, beneath the packing paper, there was a white envelope with no sender name. Elise opened it. Inside was only a small card. No child should have to learn about lack before learning how to call for their mother, Nathaniel. Elise sank down onto the floor. Around her, the brand new items lay in silence. Lee she had not yet seen. Thoughts collided in her mind. Gratitude, suspicion, shame, relief, and deeper than all of them, a cold unease. Who did this? Why? What did he want? She picked Milo up as he woke. He blinked. Then, as soon as he drank from a full bottle, his small body relaxed completely. The way he held onto the bottle made Elise turn her face away. She had not cried when she was laid off. Not when her car was taken. Not even when the man who had promised to stay left after learning she was pregnant. But this morning, watching her son drink as if it were his natural right, her eyes burned so badly she could barely keep them open. Near noon, after Milo had fallen asleep again, and the apartment was filled with supplies, that felt Lionel opened her browser and typed the name Nathaniel Cross. The results appeared almost instantly, and in that moment she felt as if the whole room tilted. Nathaniel Cross, CEO of Cross Harbor Group, a logistics and maritime shipping tycoon, estimated to be worth billions of dollars. Former naval officer, widower, private, rarely gives interviews. One of the most influential men along the East Coast. Elise clicked on the first photo, a tall man with sharp features, eyes so cold and deep the camera could not soften them. Another image showed him among rows of men in suits, not smiling, as if even light had to step aside for him. She leaned back in her chair, her chest tightening. This was not a kind stranger from some random office. This was a man powerful enough to move cargo ships, ports, contracts, money. A man like that could not step into her life by accident without changing everything. Her phone vibrated again. Another message from Nathaniel. What work did you do before everything fell apart? Elise stared long time. She could ignore it, block the number, keep the money, stay silent, and hope life forgot about her again. That would be the smart thing. But then she thought about the way he had asked about Milo before anything else. Thought about the boxes around her apartment like temporary pillars holding her life from collapsing further. Thought about the part of herself buried under hardship for so long she had almost forgotten it existed. She replied, I used to review claims and audit discrepancies for a marine insurance company. I'm good at spotting what others miss, but that belongs to a previous life now. The response came quickly. Real skills do not disappear. They are only buried under panic, a brief pause, then another message. Come to Cross Harbor tomorrow morning, 10 o'clock. Ask for Diana Mercer at reception. Bring Milo if you need to. Elise read the message again and again, her heart beginning to beat in a completely different way from the night before. No longer the panic of a desperate mother, but the rhythm of a door opening somewhere she was not sure she was allowed to step into. At that moment, she heard the rustle of paper outside the hallway. When she opened the door, she found an envelope wedged under it. The final knot. If the remaining rent was not paid this week, eviction proceedings would begin. At the same time, her phone rang. Another unknown number. The woman's voice on the other end was calm and professional, but enough to send a chill down Elise's spine. Hello? I'm calling from Child Protective Services. We received an anonymous report about the living conditions in your apartment. We would like to arrange a quick inspection. Elise stood still, her hand tightening around the letter until it crumpled. In front of her were boxes filled with survival. Behind her, her son breathed softly in his sleep. And somewhere out there, one of the most powerful men in the city had just told her to step into his world. And for the first time in a long while, Elise understood that life was not just changing, it was accelerating. Elise Rowan had never walked into a building feeling like she could be pushed out at any moment simply because the clothes she wore were not expensive enough to belong there. And that morning, she wore a cream shirt pressed flat by being tucked under her mattress all night, put on the old blazer that had followed her through her working days, held Milo in her arms, and stood before the glass tower of Cross Harbor, like someone who had stepped into the wrong world. The building's facade, reflecting the clear Charleston sky after the rain, clean to the point of coldness, the automatic glass doors sliding open without a sound. Yet Elise felt as if she could hear the crack of class distance beneath her feet. She knew exactly how she looked in the eyes of those passing by. A single mother with a diaper bag, worn heels, and a baby shifting restlessly against her chest. Someone like her did not belong here, and that was why when she stepped up to the reception desk, the woman behind it looked up and smiled as if Elise were the most important name on the list that day. The calmness of it nearly made her pause. "Hello, Miss Rowan. We've been expecting you." Elise glanced around instinctively, as if there must be another Elise Rowan more worthy of that sentence. But there was no one else, just her, Milo, and her heartbeat pounding up into her throat. Down went a woman stepped out from the private elevator area. Tall, hair neatly tied back, wearing a sharp gray dress cut like a blade, a tablet held neatly in her hand. Diana Mercer was not beautiful in a gentle way. She was beautiful in the way of people who never need to raise their voice to silence a room. Her gaze swept over Elise once, taking in the worn clothes, the dark circles under her eyes, the baby carrier. Then paused on Milo, who was seriously chewing on his finger. When Diana smiled, there was not a trace of pity in it. "Miss Rowan, come with me." Elise followed her across the wide lobby where the polished stone floor reflected her hesitant steps. There was no loud chatter, no burnt coffee smell, no overlapping phone calls like in ordinary offices. Everything in Cross Harbor operated with a cold and sealed order, like the inside of a steel ship. The elevator rose quickly. Elise felt pressure in her ears, partly from the height, partly from the sense that her life was being pulled upward at the same speed without ever asking her permission. When the doors opened, she expected a sterile meeting room or an interview desk, where she would have to explain why her career had been crushed by a chain of circumstances no one wanted to hear. But Diana did not lead her to a meeting room. She stopped in front of a frosted glass door, entered a code, and opened it, and Elise froze. Inside was not an it. Warm, quiet room with a plush carpet, a wooden crib, a rocking chair, a small bookshelf, and a few neatly arranged wooden toys. Sunlight filtered through thin cream curtains, casting a glow that made the space feel less like a temporary corner for children and more like a place someone had carefully designed around the feeling of safety. Elise stood still, her arms tightening instinctively around Milo. She did not know what hurt more, this kind of thoughtfulness, or the fact that it had been so long since anyone had prepared anything for her before she entered somewhere new. Diana observed her reaction without commenting, and after a brief silence, she spoke softly, as if not wanting to disturb the air in the room. "Mr. Cross prefers to remove obstacles before evaluating potential." Elise turned to her. "Why?" Diana met her eyes. "Because he knows what it feels like to walk into a room with too much working against you." The answer explained nothing, and yet it stripped away part of Elise's defenses. She placed Milo down on the carpet. He blinked, looked around, then quickly became absorbed by a small wooden boat, his tiny hands grasping it as if this room were the most natural thing in the world. Elise did not know whether to say thank you or run. When Diana led her into the next room, Shape, it was no longer the fear of rejection. It was the fear that if this door truly opened, she might have to become the person she used to be before life broke her. Nathaniel Cross stood by the window when she entered. There was no entourage, no formal executive greeting, just a tall man with broad shoulders, sleeves rolled up on a white shirt, his composure not coming from clothes but from discipline embedded into his bones. He turned at the sound of the door, his gaze resting on Elise, a second longer than politeness required. Not to judge her appearance, but as if looking through months of exhaustion to see what remained. Up close, Elise saw he was not like the photos online. The photos made him look like a man forged from steel and money. In person, Nathaniel was still sharp, still dangerous, but there was a quiet fatigue beneath his eyes, something only seen in people who had won too many battles, yet still failed to keep what mattered most. "Thank you for coming," he said, his voice low, even, without her bag on the chair, her hands slightly damp with sweat. "I haven't decided whether this is a good idea or a bad one." For a brief instant, the corner of Nathaniel's mouth moved as if he almost smiled but chose not to. Hesitation is often a sign of a mind still functioning well. "Please sit." The conversation did not begin the way Elise expected. He did not ask what she needed, did not mention the money from the night before, did not ask for gratitude. Instead, he asked what she had done at her previous job, how she detected discrepancies in claims, how she looked at numbers when others only saw rows and columns. At first, Elise answered cautiously, but it took only a few precise questions for the professional part of her to rise like something locked away too long finally released. She spoke about how fraudulent claims always left a rhythm, how numbers could be altered but habits were harder to hide, how even the cleanest dishonest system would betray itself in the smallest overlooked details. Nathaniel did not interrupt. Diana stood nearby, taking notes silently. But even she looked up once, when Elise explained how to trace faulty approval chains through timing gaps between data touchpoints. When Elise finally stopped, she realized she had been speaking continuously, quickly, with a confidence she had thought long gone from her life. The silence in the room was not uncomfortable. It felt like the moment after someone turned on a light in a place once believed abandoned. Nathaniel sat down across from her and slid a thin file over the table. Probation days, vendor review and internal audit division, flexible hours, partial remote work if needed, a salary sufficient that she would never again have to choose between rent and formula for her child. Elise opened the file, read the income line, then read it again. The number was not just higher than her old job, it was high enough to make her feel like he had mistaken her for someone else. She looked up immediately. Is this charity disguised as recruitment? Nathaniel met her gaze without blinking. No. Charity is when people give someone something they do not believe that person can keep. I don't rescue adults. I invest in capability. The words struck directly at the center of her chest. Not gentle, not flattering. Yet strangely that very coldness gave her a sense of dignity that pity never had. He did not look at her as a struggling mother who had just been saved. He looked at her as a sharp tool thrown into mud that still held enough value to be cleaned, sharpened, and used again. That was not kindness, it was recognition. And for Elise, that was even more dangerous, because it made her want to believe she had not yet been used up by life. From the next room, Milo let out a soft, bright laugh. Both Elise and Nathaniel turned toward the glommy. It was a small moment, but it shifted the air in the room. Nathaniel stood first and stepped outside. Elise followed. Milo sat on the carpet holding the wooden boat, his eyes lighting up when he saw his mother. But before Elise could bend down, he reached his hand toward Nathaniel. Instinct overtook thought. Nathaniel paused. Men like him were used to boardrooms, investors, ports, multi-million-dollar negotiations. No one had taught him what to do with a child reaching to be held. And that brief hesitation peeled away the final mask of the most powerful man in the building. Beneath the cold exterior was not indifference, but a deep and old emptiness. Nathaniel slowly extended his hand. Milo immediately grabbed his finger. Elise watched the scene, and with the sharp instinct that had once saved her from many mistakes, she understood something greater than the job offer. The night she sent that message by mistake, the one who replied was not just a billionaire. It was a man who had lost something so immense that he recognized hunger, fear, and broken pride in others faster than anyone else. Elise closed the file, looked up, took a breath deep enough to steady the wild rhythm in her chest, and said, her voice no sep the job. And in that very moment, inside a sunlit room that carried the scent of new wood and baby milk, a woman the entire city would underestimate, stepped back into the place where power moved, not as someone begging to survive, but as someone that place was about to need. On the first morning Elise Rowan walked into Cross Harbor as an employee, it did not feel like victory. It felt like someone who had just been pulled out of a stormy sea and still did not trust that the ground beneath her feet would not crack open. She arrived nearly an hour early, not to impress anyone, but because people who have lived too long in scarcity learn to stay one step ahead of risk whenever they can. Charleston was still half asleep under a thin layer of mist rising from the water, the sky pale blue like a fading bruise. In the elevator to the top floor, Elise stared at her own reflection in the polished metal wall. The same old outfit, the same tightly tied hair, the same eyes of someone who had gone too long without daring to expect anything good to last. Only one thing was different. Today she held a new access card in her hand. her name printed sharply on it, like proof that the world had been forced to acknowledge her existence. Soft carrier against her chest, warm, solid, calm. When the elevator doors opened, Diana Mercer was already there, waiting with a cup of coffee still steaming in her hand, as if she knew exactly Elise would need it more than any greeting. No one looked at her with irritation. No one whispered about the baby, and that unsettled Elise more than scrutiny ever could. In other places, she had grown used to looks of pity or annoyance, the two often differing only in intensity. But here the cold and precise courtesy of Cross Harbor operated like a machine that had no time to judge someone else's survival. Diana led her first to the nursery. Everything was ready: clean blankets, sterilized bottles arranged neatly. A young caregiver approached with a gentle smile, just enough to keep Milo from startling, then lifted him, as if this were not caring for the child of a woman who had escaped poverty just the night before, but welcoming a small guest who had long been expected. Elise lingered by the doorway longer than necessary, her hand reluctant to leave the now empty carrier. Motherhood in scarcity meant constantly holding on so tightly. One forgot that it might be possible to let go for a few hours without the world collapsing. Diana did not rush her. She simply said softly, "Milo will be fine. Today you need to remember how to be yourself again." The words entered Elise like a heated needle, not because they were gentle, but because they were too close to the truth. Her office was SM manager's, but bright, orderly, separated from the nursery by a thick glass wall. From her desk, she could see Milo reaching toward colorful wooden blocks. The feeling was as if someone had placed her life and her career into the same frame and told her that this time she would not have to sacrifice one to keep the other. The computer was already on, the system waiting for her to log in, when the first screen appeared with lists of vendors, documents, and payment flows. Something that had been dormant inside Elise for a long time began to stir. At first, the cautious stiffness of muscles returning to familiar work. Then the familiar rhythm of analysis catching signal again, where others might see thousands of numbers like rain against glass. Elise did not. To her, data had rhythm, had breath, had bad habits. Honest data moved differently from data forced to lie. And in less than 2 hours, she noticed a disturbance rising beneath the perfectly polished surface of Cross Harbor. It was not a large amount. In fact, it's small transactions, scattered. One tied to cold storage maintenance, another buried under port resupply, another slipping beneath equipment inspection, each small enough to escape a hurried glance. But they shared one detail so subtle it was unsettling. They appeared in a deliberate rhythm, irregular yet intentional, as if some hand understood the system's alert threshold and deliberately stayed just beneath it. Elise leaned closer to the screen, her eyes narrowing. Her fingers moved faster across the keyboard, opening deeper layers, sorting by time, by branch, by vendor code. One company name appeared more often than coincidence allowed. Harbor Crescent Solutions, a name smooth, harmless, exactly the kind designed to be forgotten. Elise clicked deeper, the legal profile suspiciously thin, contracts polished enough to pass approval, real activity traces faint as mist. She was so focused she did not hear the footsteps until a M across her desk. Nathaniel Cross stood there without announcement, without entourage, sleeves rolled up, his gaze moving from Elise's face to the screen in a single silent beat. He did not ask useless questions about whether she was settling in. His eyes scanned the open data window and stopped at the vendor code she was examining. "You started here." Elise looked up. "I don't think I chose it. I think it's trying to choose me." Something small passed across Nathaniel's expression. Not quite a smile, closer to recognition. He stepped behind her. Close enough for Elise to catch the faint scent of dry wood and something clean and cold like sea air lingering on his shirt. Most people would begin with quarterly reports or major contracts. Elise shook her head. Smart people rarely hide bodies where everyone is looking. They cut them into pieces and mix them into things everyone is too bored to notice. The words surprised even her. But Nathaniel did not. He rested a hand lightly on the back of her chair, eyes still following the data. "What do you see?" Elise inhaled, her fingers touching each line as if about to name a lie. "I see payments split into patterns. I see one vendor appearing in departments that have no reason to use the same service. I see records that are clean in a way that feels constructed, not natural. Nathaniel stayed silent long enough for Elise to think she had said too much. Then he asked, his voice low and sharp like metal cutting rope. If it's real, then what? Elise met his eyes. Then someone here is very good and very confident no one has the patience to notice. There was no sharp inhale, no dramatic frown, just a faint stillness crossing a. Not an old suspicion had just been named by someone else. He nodded once. If anything feels wrong, bring it directly to me. Do not email. Do not share with finance. Do not tell anyone, not even Diana. Elise blinked. That last part made her heart pound. No one gives instructions like that unless they have already sensed betrayal close by. Are you expecting me to find something? Nathaniel looked straight at her. I expect you to see what others have been paid not to see. Then he straightened, his gaze drifting toward the nursery where Milo was chewing on a wooden block as if it had offended him. And this time the corner of Nathaniel's mouth actually moved. One more thing. Do not let anyone make you think you are here because of my compassion. They are not smart enough to understand why I hired you. Then he walked away, leaving behind air that felt tight and alert, like the moment before a storm. By noon, Diana brought lunch directly to Elise's desk without asking what she wanted. Grilled chicken, all arranged with a precision that felt planned rather than spontaneous kindness. But Elise barely noticed the food. She had already traced 11 transactions, each approved by different accounts, yet confirmed with nearly identical delays, a coincidence only someone ignorant of human behavior would believe. She began building her own chart, connecting the points with the instinct that had once sustained her career. Harbor Crescent Solutions no longer looked like a company. It looked like a hidden valve someone had opened to let money leak out of Cross Harbor without anyone realizing they were bleeding. In the afternoon, just as Elise was saving her initial findings into a private folder, her personal phone vibrated, and Unc read and immediately recognized the voice of the woman from Child Protective Services. The apartment inspection would take place over the weekend, a routine procedure, but the words brought no comfort. Elise sat very straight, her eyes still fixed on the data-filled screen. In one world, she was being evaluated as a mother who might not be able to care for her child. In another, she was the only person in a billion-dollar building perceptive enough to notice something flowing in the wrong direction. She ended the call, her hand tightening until it turned pale. That contradiction sent a cold surge of anger through her. Her whole life, people had glanced at her and decided she was weak, finished, barely managing, and yet again and again, in the moments no one paid attention, she was the one who saw what truly lay beneath the surface. By the end of the day, as sunlight turned golden across the glass wall, and Milo had fallen asleep with his hands still gripping the wooden boat, Ada in front of her and opened a new folder. She named it with a single word, leak. A short, cold, emotionless word, but beneath it was something that could drown an entire empire if someone pulled the right thread. Elise leaned back in her chair, exhaustion finally settling in after hours of tension. And then a thought rose slowly in her mind. Sharp as a thin blade. Perhaps Nathaniel Cross had not brought her into Cross Harbor to save her. Perhaps he had smelled blood in the water long ago. And the woman the world saw as a mother struggling to survive had just become the only person hungry enough, sharp enough, and skilled enough to point out the shark swimming beneath the foundation of his company. Elise Rowan did not realize how long she had been sitting motionless in front of the screen until her neck stiffened and the glass of iced tea beside her held nothing but melted water from long-dead ice. Beyond the towering glass of Cross Harbor, the city was shifting color with the late afternoon, the harbor reflecting a dull gold like aged metal. And inside Elise's mind, every thread of data was tightening into a knot that could no longer be called something harmless like an irregularity. The small payments she had traced since the previous morning no longer stood alone. They were beginning to connect through subtle repeating rhythms, moving through secondary docs, fake maintenance contracts, delayed processing fees no one bothered to examine closely, then slipping through an intermediary entity before vanishing, as if a hand had trained for years to make blood leave a body without ever breaking the skin. Elise zoomed into each table, dragged columns across the screen, checked every transaction code again, and the more she looked, the clearer a more frightening truth became. This was not a spontaneous violation. This was a system, a machine, a pipeline built on internal knowledge, patience, and an arrogant belief that no one at Cross Harbor was still hungry enough for data to detect it. He's followed Harbor Crescent Solutions through a maze of parent companies, then paused when she saw a Wilmington registration address repeating under different corporate names. A commercial mailbox, outsourced legal representation, no real employees, no trace of real-world activity, only paperwork clean enough to pass a casual glance and too clean to be real. Elise leaned back, pressing her hands against her temples. Whoever was behind this did not just understand accounting. They understood exactly how people grew tired, how staff cut corners, how finance departments trusted systems because they needed to. When footsteps stopped at the door, Elise did not look up immediately. She had already begun to recognize Nathaniel Cross by the silence he carried with him. He entered without knocking, without asking if she was still working, as if both of them had already discarded the courtesies meant to hide urgency. Elise turned the screen toward him. "I think I found the pipeline." Nathaniel did not sit right away. He braced his hands on the desk, his eyes scanning the data lines. The structure she had built, the entity name sitting on the screen like a shark fin breaking the surface. His expression barely changed, but Elise was sharp enough to see his jaw tighten for a brief second. "Tell me," he said. Elise pointed to a growing steadier with every sentence as if the person she used to be was returning through her analysis. "These payments are split to stay under review thresholds. They are legitimized by services that appear reasonable for port operations, but the frequency and destinations do not make sense. Harbor Crescent is not the final destination. It is a transfer station. The money passes through here and then moves into a group of inactive entities. Whoever built this system understands the company's control structure extremely well. Well enough that I do not think this is an outsider." Nathaniel pulled the chair across from her and sat down slowly. In that moment, he did not look like the man at the head of a logistics empire along the East Coast. He looked like someone who had been waiting far too long for another person to say out loud what he feared. "I do not think it is an outsider either," he said, his voice low and hard like aged wood. Elise studied him for a moment. "Then why let me dig instead of handing everything to external auditors?" Nathaniel gave a faint, brief smile, so brief it felt like a cut across his face. "Because external auditors will alert the finance department before they reach anything real. And because I am no longer certain who in this building has not been bought." That answer made the room fall silent, as if even the thick glass around them had heard it. Elise had already sensed danger, but hearing him say it stripped away any remaining illusion. It was no longer a professional suspicion. It was wrought beneath power itself. She lowered her voice without realizing. "Since when?" Nathaniel turned toward the harbor. Outside, the massive cranes stood motionless like steel skeletons guarding the horizon. "Over a year," he said. "At first, just minor fluctuations in net profit reports, too small to accuse anyone, too consistent to ignore. Every time I asked for a review, I received reasonable explanations, and each quarter the signs became cleaner. Whoever this is learns quickly." Elise stayed quiet for a few seconds. Stinct had been pulling toward all along. "Why does this affect you so strongly?" Nathaniel did not answer immediately. For the first time since Elise stepped into his world, she saw hesitation in him that had nothing to do with money. When he turned back, his gaze was no longer just controlled and cold. Something deeper and darker passed through it. "My sister died on a cargo ship 11 years ago," he said, each word coming out as if dragged across something sharp. "The investigation concluded it was a technical failure. Later, I learned the safety inspection records had been altered months earlier to cut costs. A few signatures forged, a few warnings ignored, just small discrepancies on paper, things no one thought could kill." Elise felt a chill run through her. She had already understood. Nathaniel was not the kind of man who helped strangers in the night out of fleeting emotion, but she had not understood the root of what drove him. Now she did. He did not fight fraud to protect money. He fought it because he knew a number bent today could become a body tomorrow, Nathaniel continued, his eyes never leaving hers. "Since that day, I do not believe in the word insignificant anymore. Nothing is small if it is repeated long enough and in the right place. The room fell silent again, but this silence was different, but deep and heavy, carrying something close to mutual recognition between two people who had lived long enough with loss to understand that small fractures are what bring entire structures down. Elise inhaled slowly, pulling more data into a new table. There is something else. I tracked approval timing and found that different accounts share the same delay pattern. It does not behave like real users. It behaves like they are triggered from the same authentication device or the same repeated process. Nathaniel leaned closer. Ghost credentials, Elise nodded. Or someone is borrowing other people's logins, or the system has been designed so that real signatures become masks. Nathaniel leaned back, his gaze darkening. He did not need to say the name yet. Elise could already see it forming in the silence. The finance department, the executive level. Someone with enough authority to alter processes, trusted enough not to be questioned, smooth enough to explain everything as optimization. She heard her own voice before she could stop it. Who restructured the entire vendor approval system 2 years ago? Nathaniel looked at her so directly, the answer seemed to exist before he spoke. Graham Pike. The name dropped between them like a bullet that had not yet exploded. Elise knew of him, not personally, but enough to form a picture. The chief financial officer, a man known for calm clarity, someone who spoke to the board as if every crisis were just a balance sheet waiting to be smoothed. Elise opened another data window. Give me access to override requests and approve he past 2 years. Nathaniel did not ask what she was looking for. He simply sent a short message from his phone, and within a minute, new access opened on her screen. The system returned a dense list of configuration changes. Elise filtered by time, then by execution group. Graham Pike's name did not appear directly as often as she expected. He was too careful to touch every dirty part himself. But his assistants, his team, the improvement proposals he indirectly signed, all began to emerge like the backbone of a large creature buried under mud. And then Elise saw it. A sequence of special access requests submitted just weeks before the first payments flowed into Harbor Crescent. She zoomed in, her heart pounding. Nathaniel read alongside her. Neither of them spoke for several seconds. They did not need to. Both understood this was no longer intuition. It was evidence, a trace, a hand reaching a little too far out of the shadows. At that moment, Elise's personal phone lit up. A message from the social worker confirming the apartment D for Saturday morning. Beneath it, a reminder to prepare current financial records if available. Elise stared at the phone, then back at the data. Life truly had a cruel sense of timing. While she was tracing a financial pipeline, possibly involving millions of dollars, she still had to prove to a stranger that she was capable of being a mother. Nathaniel noticed the shift in her expression. What is it? Elise locked the screen, but not fast enough to hide the flicker of exhaustion. Child Protective Services. Someone made an anonymous report about my living conditions. They are coming this weekend. Something unusual passed over Nathaniel's face. Not pity, but the cold recognition of someone who had just seen the first move of a conflict not declared. Do you think it is connected? Elise shook her head slightly, then hesitated. I do not have proof, but the moment I touch the money pipeline, someone wants to prove I am an unfit mother. Not many things in life align that perfectly. Nathaniel stood, his voice lower, sharper, more certain. Keep everything you have found on this machine and create an encrypted offline copy. Do not send it to anyone, even if I request it by email. Elise looked up. And you, Nathaniel turned toward the city stretching beneath the tower. I will start looking at who in this company thinks they are safe. When he left the office, the late afternoon light covered the glass walls in a copper glow, turning Cross Harbor into a mass islands before a storm. Elise turned back to the screen, her heart racing but her hands steady. A day ago, she had been a woman diluting the last bottle of formula in the dark. Now she sat at the center of a billion-dollar empire, holding the first thread that could unravel a scheme built on the arrogance of those who believed someone like her could only beg, never expose them. And that thought made Elise's eyes turn cold, because the people who underestimate her most are often the ones standing closest to the edge. Graham Pike's name began to live in Elise Rowan's mind like a stain of ink slowly spreading through absorbent paper. At first, it was just a name within the executive structure, a polished title hanging on glass doors and internal memos. But the deeper Elise dug into the history of system changes, the more she felt that this man was not merely running Cross Harbor's finance department, but reshaping the backbone of the entire company into the form he wanted. Old reconciliation processes had not been removed with force, but with the most dangerous language in any large corporation: optimization, streamlining, efficiency, words that sounded as clean as distilled water. Yet beneath them, layer after layer of cross-checks had been quietly stripped away, warning thresholds lowered, pathways widened, just enough for a contaminated flow to slip through without raising alarm. Elise sat in front of the screen with dry, burning eyes, pulling each change log into the light, and almost everywhere there was a breach. There were traces of Graham, not directly, not obviously, but appearing through assistants, through financial engineering teams, through requests signed with such legitimacy that an ordinary person would feel foolish for questioning them. And that was what made him dangerous. The foolish expose their crimes through greed. The dangerous make it look like improvement. Dee built a preliminary map. The system exceptions did not just appear before the first transfers into Harbor Crescent Solutions. They coincided with the period when Graham Pike was given authority to oversee the restructuring of the finance department. After a major round of cuts, ghost approvals, rare overrides, intermediary accounts used for the wrong purposes, all weaving together into an invisible web that could only be seen from the right angle. Elise was focused on an old email chain when Diana Mercer tapped lightly on the doorframe. Holding a thin file and a second cup of coffee, she placed them on the desk without speaking at once, her eyes moving across the layered data windows on the screen before settling on Elise's face where exhaustion was visible but had not dulled her sharpness. "I assume you have not eaten anything beyond half a cookie since morning," Diana said calmly. Elise was about to deny it when her stomach betrayed her with a tight contraction. Diana did not smile. She pulled a chair and sat across from her as if she were not the chief of staff to the most powerful man in Cross Harbor, but a witness who had been waiting for this moment. "He has not told me what you found," she continued, "but I recognize that look." Elise lifted her gaze. "What look?" Diana met her eyes directly. "The look of someone who has just touched something this entire building has been trained not to touch." Elise stayed silent, weighing how far to go. Nathaniel had told her not to speak to anyone, not even Diana. But her instinct also told her this woman was not just a loyal right hand. She was someone who had lived between power and chaos long enough to hear cracks in concrete before walls collapsed. "I cannot share details," Elise said finally, "but I think someone has turned the finance department into a system that drains blood." Diana did not look shocked, only a faint tightening at the corner of her eye. "If you reach that conclusion this quickly, then either you are a genius or things are worse than I thought." Elise looked down at the file Diana had brought. Graham Pike's name was printed on the cover. "I did not ask for this." Diana rested her hands on her knees. "You did not? But in a company like this, the most dangerous thing is not knowing too little, it is knowing alone." Elise opened the file. The first pages were a flawless executive profile. Harvard, strategic consulting, transition into maritime logistics, recruited for his ability to clean crises and raise profits. But from the third page onward, the tone shifted. A previous CFO had left abruptly just months before Graham took over. 2 internal control team leads resigned within a year after the restructuring. A port operations director stepped down over disagreements without official explanation. No scandals, no obvious fingerprints, just a trail of people disappearing from the organizational chart, precisely where the company became most vulnerable to being bent. Nathaniel appeared at the door without first time. Elise saw that Diana was not surprised at all, as if there was an unspoken understanding between them that had been operating for years. Nathaniel glanced at the file in Elise's hands, then at Diana. "You gave it to her." Diana stood. "If you are going to ask a woman to dig into the belly of this beast, then she needs to know where its teeth are." The air in the room tightened just enough for Elise to understand. Their relationship was not simply boss and assistant. Diana was one of the few people in Cross Harbor who spoke to Nathaniel as a human being rather than a title. Nathaniel did not argue. He stepped inside, closed the door behind him, and looked at Elise in a way that told her this was no longer just a work update. I need to show you something, he said, not on the system. Nathaniel's office was wide, yet coldly minimal, as if every been removed so nothing could distract the will of the person inside. There was only one photograph angled on the desk. Elise had never really looked at it before. But now, as Nathaniel walked around the desk and picked it up, she saw a young woman smiling on a ship deck, her hair blown by the wind, her eyes so bright the image seemed to carry its own warmth. My sister, Nathaniel said. Her name was Caroline. His voice did not tremble, but Elise understood the cost of that steadiness. Some people are hurt so deeply that pain no longer shows through tears or fractures. It hardens into a thin layer of steel wrapped around every word. Nathaniel placed the photograph between them. When the accident happened, the official report said it was a chain of unforeseeable technical failures. A year later, I learned that 3 safety warnings had been removed from the records to keep delivery on schedule. A few signatures forged, a few alerts ignored, just small discrepancies on paper, things no one believed could kill. Elise said nothing. She understood he was not telling her this to seek sympathy. He was handing her the key to the obsession that had brought her into Cross Harbor. He did not help her that night out of generosity. He answered her message because he recognized the echo of a helplessness he once failed to save. Nathaniel slid another document toward her. This is a list of control changes in Ham Pike over the past 2 years, alongside related approvals from his group. I do not need you to suspect anymore. I need you to find the first fracture deep enough that no one can cover it. Elise looked at the names, the timestamps, the approvals that made the company believe it was being streamlined while it was actually being hollowed out. Do you believe Graham is behind all of this? She asked. Nathaniel answered almost immediately. I believe he is smart enough to build it. I do not yet have enough evidence to end him. That is the only difference. Elise turned the pages until her eyes stopped at an email chain requesting override access to vendor logs under the pretext of preparing for a high-level audit. The sender was Graham's assistant. The timestamp was exactly 12 days before the first transfer into Harbor Crescent, a number as cold as a blade. She looked up slowly. This is the first point. Nathaniel nodded once. And if you can follow it from here to the money flow, then we will have more than instinct. The afternoon stretched like heated rubber. Elise returned to her office, locked the door, half closed into the data with a near-violent focus, beyond the glass. Milo sat in the nursery, holding a stuffed giraffe someone had placed in his hands, his tiny legs kicking against the carpet, unaware that his mother was tracing a thread that could collapse half the executive board. Occasionally, Diana passed by without entering, glancing in just enough for Elise to know she was watching more than anyone realized. By late day, Elise found what she needed: an internal email sent between Graham's assistant and the financial technology department requesting temporary access to vendor logs for a sensitive audit that never actually happened. But after that, email Harbor Crescent Solutions began receiving its first payments. Elise sat still staring at the screen for a few seconds, a cold sensation running down her spine. This was not the final bullet, but it was the casing, the echo of a gunshot inside the walls, enough to prove that someone had opened the door for the dirty money to enter. When Nathaniel returned at the end of the day, Elise did not need to explain much. She simply turned the screen toward him. Timestamps, the access chain, and silence fell over them like deep water. This is it, Elise said. Not everything, but the first place where his hand shows clearly enough for me to name. Nathaniel looked at her, and this time his gaze held something new. Not just evaluation or calculation, but a form of trust forged under pressure. Something that appears when one person understands the other has crossed the line between being hired and being chosen. I will meet Graham, he said. Elise looked up sharply, now, not publicly, just enough to see how he reacts when he realizes he is no longer completely invisible. She wanted to object, to say it was too early, but she saw in Nathaniel's calm a decision already sealed like a ship hatch in a storm. From the moment Elise pulled the name Graham Pike out of the shadows, this was no longer a quiet audit. It was becoming a confrontation with a face, a threat. And the woman who once sat in the dark, diluting the last bottle of milk for her child, was now standing at the edge of a conflict where her opponent still did not realize that the piece he saw as expendable was in fact the first blade pressing against his throat. That morning, Cross Harbor looked so clean and calm. It was almost cruel. Sunlight poured through the towering glass panels, sliding across the stone floors, clinging to the metal railings, coating everything in the cold light of a place too accustomed to power to need noise. But beneath that calm, something was tightening like a mooring cable before a storm. Elise Rowan felt it. The moment she stepped out of the elevator. No one told her anything unusual. No warning emails. No internal messages. Just a thin, sharp stillness, as if the entire building was holding its breath without realizing it. Nathaniel Cross had arranged for Graham Pike to come to a private meeting late that morning. Not an official meeting. No minutes, no one else in the room. Just a conversation between the head of the company and the man who held its financial arteries. But Elise knew there was nothing more dangerous than a private conversation between two powerful men when both understood that at least one of them was lying. Nathaniel had told her to stay in her office, not to enter the meeting area, not to let anyone see her involvement. So she sat in front of a secondary screen, watching the security camera feed from the conference room below. While behind the glass, Milo slept with his tiny hand resting on the belly of a stuffed giraffe. The image was painfully surreal. A child sleeping peacefully just meters behind his mother, while in front of her, a confrontation that could shake an empire was about to begin. The meeting room on time with the ease of a man who had never chased anything except his own ambition. Wearing a perfectly fitted navy suit, tie aligned to perfection, hairstyled with the precision of someone who believed every detail projected control, he carried no thick folders, no assistant, only a slim flash drive in his jacket pocket, and that small detail made Elise's stomach tighten. Nathaniel was already seated at the head of the table. No handshake, no polite greeting, just two men facing each other across a glass surface, reflecting light like an invisible blade. Nathaniel spoke first, his voice calm to the point of danger. "Thank you for coming." Graham sat, pulling his chair with controlled ease, as if he had rehearsed the motion. "I always have time for you, Nathaniel." Elise immediately disliked the way he said his name, too familiar, too smooth, too much like someone who had stood close to power for too long and begun to believe he owned part of it. Nathaniel did not e-slit a thin file toward the center of the table. "I reviewed recent quarterly transactions. There are a few that concern me." Graham glanced at the file without touching it. "That happens when a company grows quickly. Growth creates noise." Nathaniel tilted his head slightly. Noise is an interesting word. Is Harbor Crescent Solutions also noise? For the first time, Graham's eyes shifted. Not much, just a slightly slower blink. A pause shorter than a heartbeat. But for someone like Elise, it was enough. He knew. He knew he had just heard the one name that should not be known unless someone had traced the trail all the way down. Graham leaned back, his lips forming a thin smile like a razor edge. "I must admit that name does not immediately mean anything to me. The finance department handles hundreds of vendors." Nathaniel did not blink. Strange. That company appears in facilities, research, and legal. Such a versatile vendor, and the chief financial officer does not remember. Elise felt her hand tighten against the edge of her desk. Nathaniel was no longer probing. He was pushing, inch by inch. Graham maintained his composure, but the friendliness had vanished from the corners of his mouth. "I can have my team review it. If you are concerned about process, I will request a full audit. You are your team," Nathaniel said, and the sentence landed like a lock clicking shut. In her office, Elise almost forgot to be. Nathaniel leaned forward, both hands on the table, his gaze no longer that of a CEO questioning a subordinate, but of someone who had stopped allowing the other man to perform. "I know what is happening, Graham. I have approval flows, override histories, duplicated authentication traces, and a chain of entities that do not exist outside paperwork. You have been draining money from Cross Harbor through ghost pipelines, piece by piece, clean enough to be ignored. And you did it because you believed no one in this building still had the courage to look closely." Graham did not deny it immediately, which was more dangerous than denial. He let silence sit between them for a few seconds before letting out a small laugh that sent a chill through Elise. So you have been taking your new accountant quite seriously. Elise froze. He knew. Of course he knew. In a world built on data and concealment, no movement near the center went unnoticed. Nathaniel did not react. Her name is Elise, and she saw what you hoped everyone would continue not to see. Graham tilted his head, his eyes gleaming with a cruel amusement, as if finally allowed to drop the mask. How touching! A poor single mother picked up from the edge of the city, placed in a glass office, and suddenly she becomes the moral hero of Cross Harbor. He spoke slowly, deliberately, each word like mud thrown at something clean. Elise felt her face burn, but what chilled her was that Nathaniel did not respond the way Graham expected. He simply sat there, steady as stone beneath deep water, waiting. Then Graham did something Elise had not anticipated. He pulled on his pocket and placed it on the table with the ease of someone placing a final piece on a board. You think you are the only one who knows how to collect data, Nathaniel. It contains emails, transfer orders, analyses that can be interpreted in a way that makes you appear to be using company funds to cover personal obligations and influence a higher outside protocol. He leaned forward, lowering his voice to a cold whisper. Truth is less important than what the board can be led to believe, and right now they are more tired of your grief than of my confidence. Elise felt the blood drain from her fingers. This was no longer defense. This was an ambush. Graham had not only stolen, he had prepared an alternate version of reality to destroy Nathaniel if cornered. Nathaniel looked at the flash drive, then at him. He did not look shocked, and that caused a slight hesitation in Graham, as if he had expected anger or fracture. "What do you want?" Nathaniel asked, and the answer came smooth and cold like oil. "I want you to resign quietly before the weekend. I want a polite announcement about a transition of power for personal reasons, and I want that girl gone from the company before she begins to believe she matters. If you comply, I will let her leave with a generous settlement, and no one will mention her child in any document." For the first time, the control in Nathaniel's face shifted. Not because of the tea, because Graham had touched Elise and Milo as if they were convenient weaknesses on a strategy board. When Nathaniel spoke, his voice dropped so low, Elise had to lean closer to the screen to hear it. "You just made your biggest mistake." Graham stood, buttoning his jacket, his smile returning, now openly laced with contempt. "No, Nathaniel. Your biggest mistake was thinking you are still the only one in this building who knows how to play war." He turned and walked out, leaving the flash drive on the table like an armed mine. The camera feed remained steady, the room unchanged. Glass table, leather chairs, cold light. But the ends formed completely. Elise sat frozen, her hands numb, her heart pounding against her ribs. Minutes passed before Nathaniel moved. He remained seated at the head of the table, staring at the flash drive, as if looking into a future that had just shifted. In that moment, Elise understood the investigation had passed the point of safe return. Graham Pike was not just a greedy man hiding behind numbers. He was the kind who would burn the entire ship just to escape with the only lifeboat if it meant winning. And worse, he had judged her correctly in one way. She was the easiest target. No reputation, no official authority, a single mother newly returned to corporate life. In the eyes of the board, the media, anyone who preferred a simple story, she could easily be shaped into a woman manipulated by a billionaire. Elise slowly stood. Behind her, Milo stirred in his sleep, then settled again on the screen. Nathaniel finally lifted his head, and even through the camera, she could see what had changed in his eyes. No hesitation remained. No hope that this was merely an internal cleanup that could be handled with paperwork and a quiet dismissal. This was war, dirty, personal, ruthless. And the woman once sitting in the dark, diluting her child's last bottle, was now the only witness who saw exactly when it truly began. After Graham Pike left the meeting room, Cross Harbor did not erupt. There were no alarms, no urgent emails, no emergency meetings called in haste. The building remained bright, the screens continued to flicker, calls connected as if nothing had happened, and it was precisely that normalcy that chilled Elise Rowan to the bone. Places of real power do not tremble when threatened. They sink quietly like water before something heavy fully submerges. Elise stood in front of the camera feed for a few more seconds, her eyes fixed on the small flash drive still lying on the table, like a poisoned tooth embedded in glass and silence. In her mind, every word Graham had spoken echoed with terrifying clarity. He had not only prepared an escape, he had prepared another version of the truth, a story polished enough for the board to swallow, dirty enough to push her back where society believed she belonged. At the bottom, silent, grateful just to have once been allowed inside. He peed into her office nearly an hour later. His face did not look like that of a man who had lost, but it was no longer covered by the cold composure he had worn in the past days. It looked like the face of someone who had just confirmed his worst suspicion was real. Elise stood immediately. "I saw everything," she said. No introduction, no hesitation. Nathaniel paused in the middle of the room, looking at her for a long moment as if weighing whether to keep the last wall between them. Then he stepped forward, placed both hands on the edge of her desk, leaning slightly toward her. "I did not intend for you to see that part." Elise let out a dry laugh, thin as crumpled paper. "Did you really think, after everything, I would sit still and pretend I am not part of this?" Nathaniel looked at her, then lowered his head slightly, not in surrender but in acknowledgement. "No," he said softly. "Perhaps I just wanted to keep you out of the filth a little longer." The sentence ling's not flirtation, not a promise, just a raw truth from a man unaccustomed to revealing his most vulnerable side. But Elise had no room left for softness. Graham had made the rules clear. If they were slow by even a moment, he would move first. If they held evidence without sealing every escape, he would flip the board and turn them into desperate figures clinging to power. He had the board, he had prepared dirt, he had the money and people to make a single mother like her look like a mistake. Cross Harbor needed to erase. Elise inhaled deeply. "We do not have time to probe anymore." Nathaniel nodded slowly and sat across from her. "There is someone I have not introduced to you, a former federal fraud investigator. Her name is Rebecca Shaw. I have been working with her quietly for months, but I did not let her touch the core system because I did not have someone inside skilled enough to separate real data from noise. Now I do." Elise met his gaze without blinking. "And if we bring her in now," Nathaniel answered immediately, "nothing will remain contained. Once Rebecca sees enough to confirm organized fraud, we either strike first or allow Graham to present his version to the public." Elise turned toward the glass wall. Milo had just woken and was sitting in the nursery, holding the stuffed giraffe, his wide eyes looking at her through the thick glass. The sight pierced her chest. All her life she had lived defensively, defending against bills, against hunger, against judgment. But there comes a point when retreat is no longer possible, when attacking becomes the only form of survival left. "Call her," Elise said. The call happened late in the afternoon. Haniel did something Elise had not expected. He gave her a new address, an access card, and a phone for internal use only. "Tonight you are not going back to your old apartment," he said. Elise reacted immediately. "I cannot just disappear. I have a child services inspection scheduled this weekend. If I leave now," Nathaniel cut her off with calm authority. "All the more reason for you not to be there tonight. If Graham or anyone behind the anonymous report is trying to pressure you, your apartment is the easiest place to reach. Rebecca will handle the paperwork. Diana will ensure your absence tomorrow raises no questions. But tonight, you and Milo stay somewhere I can control." Elise was about to argue again. Then she understood this was not excessive kindness. This was strategy. Nathaniel was not acting like a wealthy man trying to protect her. He was relocating a witness and a living piece of evidence out of range. The realization was both cold and strangely reassuring. By the time they arrived at the safe apartment on a quiet street a few blocks from the waterfront, night had fully settled. The place was not luxurious, just clean, secure, stocked with food, medicine, a travel crib, and a silent security system embedded within the walls. Elise set Milo down on the small rug in the living room, watching him wobble a few steps before dropping down to hug a soft fabric ball. Her life had changed too quickly for her to trust anything good. But even doubt could not erase the fact that no one had ever planned for her safety this carefully. 10 minutes later, the internal phone rang. Rebecca Shaw did interested in introductions. Her voice was sharp, dry, cutting straight to the core. "You are Elise Rowan." Yes, Nathaniel says you are the first to see the break in the money flow. I want everything from the beginning, not the polite version, the real one. Elise sat on the edge of the sofa, her eyes still on Milo, and began to tell it all. The small payments below thresholds, Harbor Crescent Solutions, the Wilmington mailbox address, the ghost credentials, the override request email, the way every path led into the dark space under Graham Pike's control. Then she told the part where Graham used her as leverage, where he threatened Nathaniel, where he mentioned Milo as a pressure point. Rebecca did not interrupt once. Only when Elise finished did the line fall silent for a few seconds. Then Rebecca spoke, still dry, but now carrying something closer to real attention. You did not just see it. You arranged it in a way no one can deny. Elise felt no pride, only exhaustion gripping the back of her neck. What now? Rebecca answered without hesitation. Now we verify and set a trap. Someone like Graham does not fall because he is accused. He falls because he believes he still controls how everyone reacts around him. We will use that instinct to tighten the noose. Over the next 2 days, Elise's life split into two distinct halves. One was that G-milk, feeding Milo, soothing him to sleep, picking up toys thrown to the floor for the 10th time. The other was diving into data with Rebecca through encrypted channels, peeling back layers of the system, like skin from a beast, to find how its heart beat. Rebecca demanded everything: timestamps, access logs, device identifiers, configuration changes buried beneath dull technical language. Nathaniel moved like a shadow with a precise goal, keeping the company running while quietly isolating those he no longer trusted. Persuading board members, not fully aligned with Graham, to delay any unusual votes, Diana moved between everything, adjusting schedules, blocking questions, redirecting rumors before they could take shape, and by the end of the second day, Rebecca called again, her voice now edged with certainty. I have enough to say. This is no longer an internal suspicion. This is an organized extraction model. Not just one person, but Graham is the controlling node. Elise closed her eyes briefly. The room was so quiet she could hear Milo breathing in the next room. Then Rebecca continued, each word striking like a hammer against Elise's spine. Tomorrow we bait him. A fabricated memo about an executive contract review will be placed exactly where his team can detect it. If he touches it, he exposes himself. If he retaliates, he confirms fear. Whichever he chooses, he steps further out of the shadows. Elise opened her eyes and looked at her reflection in the dark glass. A woman who had spent her life fighting for scraps of air now sat in the center of an executive-level trap, not as a victim, but as the one who understood the beast's path most clearly. And for the first time since Graham spoke her name with contempt in that meeting room, Elise felt her fear transform. It did not disappear. It hardened, sharpened, became something strong enough to be held like a weapon. After Graham Pike left the meeting room, Cross Harbor did not erupt. There were no alarms, no urgent emails, no emergency meetings called in haste. The building remained bright, the screens continued to flicker, calls connected as if nothing had happened. And it was precisely that normalcy that chilled Elise Rowan to the bone. Places of real power do not tremble when threatened. They sink quietly like water before something heavy fully submerges. Elise stood in front of the camera feed for a few more seconds, her eyes fixed on the small flash drive still lying on the table like a poisoned tooth embedded in glass and silence. In her mind, every word Graham had spoken echoed with terrifying clarity. He had not only prepared an escape, he had prepared another version of the truth. A story polished enough for the board to swallow, dirty enough to push her back where society believed she belonged. At the bottom, silent, grateful just to have once been allowed inside. Peed into her office nearly an hour later, his face did not look like that of a man who had lost, but it was no longer covered by the cold composure he had worn in the past days. It looked like the face of someone who had just confirmed his worst suspicion was real. Elise stood immediately. I saw everything, she said. No introduction, no hesitation. Nathaniel paused in the middle of the room, looking at her for a long moment, as if weighing whether to keep the last wall between them. Then he stepped forward, placed both hands on the edge of her desk, leaning slightly toward her. I did not intend for you to see that part. Elise let out a dry laugh, thin as crumpled paper. Did you really think, after everything, I would sit still and pretend I am not part of this? Nathaniel looked at her, then lowered his head slightly. Not in surrender, but in acknowledgement. "No," he said softly. "Perhaps I just wanted to keep you out of the filth a little longer." The sentence ling, not flirtation, not a promise, just a raw truth from a man unaccustomed to revealing his most vulnerable side. But Elise had no room left for softness. Graham had made the rules clear. If they were slow by even a moment, he would move first. If they held evidence without sealing every escape, he would flip the board and turn them into desperate figures clinging to power. He had the board. He had prepared dirt. He had the money and people to make a single mother like her look like a mistake. Cross Harbor needed to erase. Elise inhaled deeply. "We do not have time to probe anymore." Nathaniel nodded slowly and sat across from her. "There is someone I have not introduced to you, a former federal fraud investigator. Her name is Rebecca Shaw. I have been working with her quietly for months, but I did not let her touch the core system because I did not have someone inside skilled enough to separate real data from noise. Now I do." Elise met his gaze without blinking. "And if we bring her in now," Nathaniel answered immediately, "nothing will remain contained. Once Rebecca sees enough to confirm organized fraud, we either strike first or allow Graham to present his version to the public." Elise turned toward the glass wall. Milo had just woken and was sitting in the nursery holding the stuffed giraffe, his wide eyes looking at her through the thick glass. The sight pierced her chest. All her life she had lived defensively, defending against bills, against hunger, against judgment. But there comes a point when retreat is no longer possible, when attacking becomes the only form of survival left. "Call her," Elise said. The call happened late in the afternoon. Hanil did something Elise had not expected. He gave her a new address, an access card, and a phone for internal use only. "Tonight you are not going back to your old apartment," he said. Elise reacted immediately. "I cannot just disappear. I have a child services inspection scheduled this weekend. If I leave now," Nathaniel cut her off with calm authority. "All the more reason for you not to be there tonight. If Graham or anyone behind the anonymous report is trying to pressure you, your apartment is the easiest place to reach. Rebecca will handle the paperwork. Diana will ensure your absence tomorrow raises no questions. But tonight, you and Milo stay somewhere I can control." Elise was about to argue again. Then she understood this was not excessive kindness. This was strategy. Nathaniel was not acting like a wealthy man trying to protect her. He was relocating a witness and a living piece of evidence out of range. The realization was both cold and strangely reassuring. By the time they arrived at the safe apartment on a quiet street a few blocks from the waterfront, night had fully settled. The place was not luxurious, just clean, secure, stocked with food, medicine, a travel crib, and a silent security system embedded within the walls. Elise set Milo down on the small rug in the living room. Watching him wobble a few steps before dropping down to hug a soft fabric ball, her life had changed too quickly for her to trust anything good. But even doubt could not erase the fact that no one had ever planned for her safety this carefully. 10 minutes later, the internal phone rang. Rebecca Shaw did. Interested in introductions. Her voice was sharp, dry, cutting straight to the core. "You are Elise Rowan." "Yes, Nathaniel says you are the first to see the break in the money flow. I want everything from the beginning, not the polite version, the real one." Elise sat on the edge of the sofa, her eyes still on Milo, and began to tell it all. The small payments below thresholds, Harbor Crescent Solutions, the Wilmington mailbox address, the ghost credentials, the override request email. The way every path led into the dark space under Graham Pike's control. Then she told the part where Graham used her as leverage, where he threatened Nathaniel, where he mentioned Milo as a pressure point. Rebecca did not interrupt once. Only when Elise finished did the line fall silent for a few seconds. Then Rebecca spoke, still dry, but now carrying something closer to real attention. "You did not just see it. You arranged it in a way no one can deny." Elise felt no pride, only exhaustion gripping the back of her neck. "What now?" Rebecca answered without hesitation. "Now we verify and set a trap. Someone like Graham does not fall because he is accused. He falls because he believes he still controls how everyone reacts around him. We will use that instinct to tighten the noose." Over the next 2 days, Elise's life split into two distinct halves. One was that G milk, feeding Milo, soothing him to sleep, picking up toys thrown to the floor for the 10th time. The other was diving into data with Rebecca through encrypted channels, peeling back layers of the system like skin from a beast to find how its heartbeat. Rebecca demanded everything: timestamps, access logs, device identifiers, configuration changes buried beneath dull technical language. Nathaniel moved like a shadow with a precise goal: keeping the company running while quietly isolating those he no longer trusted, persuading board members not fully aligned with Graham to delay any unusual votes. Diana moved between everything, adjusting schedules, blocking questions, redirecting rumors before they could take shape, and by the end of the second day, Rebecca called again, her voice now edged with certainty. I have enough to say this is no longer an internal suspicion. This is an organized extraction model. Not just one person, but Graham is the controlling node. Elise closed her eyes briefly. The room was so quiet she could hear Milo breathing in the next room. Then Rebecca continued, each word striking like a hammer against Elise's spine. Tomorrow we bait him. A fabricated memo about an executive contract review will be placed exactly where his team can detect it. If he touches it, he exposes himself. If he retaliates, he confirms fear. Whichever he chooses, he steps further out of the shadows. Elise opened her eyes and looked at her reflection in the dark glass. A woman who had spent her life fighting for scraps of air now sat in the center of an executive-level trap, not as a victim, but as the one who understood the beast's path most clearly. And for the first time since Graham spoke her name with contempt in that meeting room, Elise felt her fear transform. It did not disappear. It hardened, sharpened, became something strong enough to be held like a weapon. And so, from a dark night filled with nothing but the sound of a crying child and a message sent by mistake, Elise's life turned in a direction no one could have imagined. But the most beautiful part of this story is not money, power, or the grand doors that were opened. The most beautiful part is that even at her lowest point, she did not lose her kindness, her strength, or the true value within herself. Because sometimes what changes a life is not a miracle falling from the sky, but the moment someone sees the light in you before you are even able to believe that it still exists. If this story has touched your heart, leave a comment and share the moment that moved you the most. Maybe your words will reach someone who needs a little more faith to keep going. And if you enjoy stories that are dramatic, deep, and full of emotion like this one, don't forget to like and subscribe so you won't miss the journeys ahead. Because the next story might be the one that makes you pause, then rise stronger than before.